A pleasure to meet all at last. Welcome back to Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again, Season 2. So for this piece, it's only fitting that I basically give off a whole different kind of vibe. I've covered 3 Columbia Pictures related films, 2 Ghostbusters films, and Zombieland. So for number 4, you're probably wondering, am I going to keep going on with the Columbia stuff? Well, surely. There's a lot of other things worth exploring that are Columbia-based, but now we're going to diverge from that direction and try ourselves a hand at Legendary Pictures. Yep. This is the same film company that has brought us such big hits over the years, but none so much bigger, or could I say, more kaiju-sized, than the MonsterVerse films. Yeah, that's right. Ever since May 2014, Godzilla 2014 to be exact, was meant to celebrate both the 60-year anniversary of the franchise, but also harken a brand new, fresh approach to that of the Godzilla film series. Knowing the somewhat bitter travesty that happened in 1998 with Roland Emmerich, it's only fitting that the American side of the kaiju film franchise of some sorts would have to give it another try. 16 years after Godzilla 98 came around, which is really Zilla, this is basically what it is. Legendary would claim a hold of the franchise and get permission from Toho, the original creator of the franchise in 1954 to the present, and make their own film. And what do we get out of it? Well, first of all, we have ourselves a film centering around a scientist named Kyle Chandler. Yeah, the actor himself portrays a scientist who ends up losing some people, and we basically get ourselves a newer representation of the classic nuke explosion from the original. Yeah, if you're all familiar with Godzilla, he is a being of pure radiation. Basically the primary consequence, according to Japanese folklore, and of course Japanese cinema, that there are lots of things that could possibly go wrong if nuclear weapons testing were to take effect. And as we've learned in World War II, it was a sight to behold. But, you know, there's a lot of other films out there that actually do circulate the various nuclear weapons and warfare surrounding radiation, which ultimately does lead to the birthing of Godzilla and other such things going on in Japan. But those are basically a whole different thing. For Legendary, it was more or less faithful to the original, giving us the same sort of feeling that we had with the original, though maybe not as effectively as what the old black and white films did in 1954 and so on. But in any case though, this opening prologue would only serve as a fresh new beginning for what the franchise would truly be able to give us. Yeah, and after 60 years, some people might think it wouldn't have been as possible as we would have hoped for an American adaptation of Godzilla to take place, but oh man, were we wrong. Essentially speaking, this is a whole different Godzilla. The kind of design that he has is very much so appropriately well made after the original, but with some modifications, with this sort of whale-like appearance and some gorilla-styled swollenness going on with him. After all, Gojira is actually a combination of the Japanese terms for gorilla and whale. So I feel like that to some degree, the kind of bulky nature of his design with very stumpy elephant-like features and a rather thick neck and face line and all that good stuff and some sharp spines on the back. It probably does make sense from a certain standpoint that with the term Gojira basically applying to the original Japanese title of the film before it was turned to Godzilla, King of the Monsters in 1956 for the American audiences, and having good old Raymond Burr in the film itself. 60 years later, this is the kind of philosophy that has been followed along quite well. I guess the only real question is, where did Raymond Burr truly end up with this film? Well, that's unfortunately something that has not been circulated. So, as disappointing as that might sound, you probably would wonder if this film would probably not be as good as the original. But once again, we had yet to learn about this stuff. In any case though, A lot of things take place, mainly with the human characters, just as we would normally come to expect when watching Godzilla films, because after all, there's only so much budget they can put together for giant practical effects and sets and suit designs and whatnot. Now, this is basically where things are a lot different. As we know, in the year 2014, Godzilla is CG. In the same way that we've seen him in the power of CGI in many different ways in the past, some look good, some don't look as good, but in this case, the kind of detail that they put together in his overall design, the animation being nice and fluent, and of course the sinister roar, which still retains that classic note of leather gloves being rubbed against the strings of large instruments like the bass and cello. It's really an elaborate piece that does as good as it possibly can get. Not only being faithful to how the original was created, but also inventing some newer techniques. It basically has followed the original quite well up until that very point. But in terms of the plot, we don't just get Godzilla destroying various things. After all, this primarily takes place in Hawaii. Yeah, so as opposed to Tokyo, Japan, or other locations he's been commonly known to trample and stomp around, no, in this case, for us American audiences, he attacks Hawaii. And for what exact reason? Well, turns out there is another large monster. A monster that is in fact being studied by a local military group known as Monarch. You could basically say that they're the American equivalent of G-Force, or UNGCC, which was basically a common cliche that occurred throughout the films. Yeah, and especially during the Heisei era. The UNGCC, or United Nations Godzilla Counteract Control, was basically established as a means of creating weapons that would be strong enough to take down kaiju of his size, and also kaiju that are as tough as he is. But Monarch is more the American equivalent, so in the same regard that there was a special military team specifically meant for the purpose of defeating Godzilla in Japan, there's also one in the States. And because Godzilla is attacking Hawaii, that's why Monarch has come into play. And well, it turns out that they have another threat looming around. As I've just said, another monster is around. And you probably know what this means. A kaiju battle between Godzilla and the creature known as Muto. That's right, that's basically just what the name of it is. And it turns out he's not alone. Muto actually has a mate. 2 Mutos being fought by the same kaiju. I mean, it really goes to show they were able to not only follow what the original had given us 60 years prior, but also invent some new things around. It's not just with the fact that they invented their own Godzilla-based military squad, but they also invented some new kaiju for him to fight. So they didn't exactly build off of the backs of Toho entirely by allowing Godzilla to fight known creatures like Anguirus, Ghidorah, Rodan, Mothra, or Baragon. No, Muto 1 and 2, you know. So in any case, this was something that I have more than just come to accept over the years. And being that I had a more recent viewing of the film, it's given me lots of bigger details to catch up on. And to some extent, knowing my more recent viewing of the film, I'd hate to point that out, but there are actually a number of things wrong with it. One of the most common things about these films, especially with this one, is that they tend to get pretty dark. Granted, with the original, it was common for Godzilla to have a bit of a dark presence, no pun intended. And of course, it takes place at night for the most part, in Hawaii and in Tokyo. So in both cases, you have the old film, which centers on Tokyo being destroyed at Godzilla during the nighttime, and then you have Hawaii in nighttime, where Godzilla is also making an appearance 60 years later. So the comparisons, again, they definitely do have an identical face to it, but this is pretty much where it tends to run flat. Godzilla 2014 does not need to take place during the darkness. A time where it could be difficult for us to view Godzilla by any means, when he's covered in smoke and fire, and now we got darkness to deal with. So it's one thing for Godzilla's destruction to obscure his identity and his overall appearance, only allowing for small hints of what his entire body would look like. And so that's one thing that I found disappointing. One other obvious thing that most people have also complained about was the fact that the film has focused a little too much on the human characters. Granted, the likes of Kyle Chandler's character, plus the Monarch scientists, and everybody else involved happen to be essential to the plot in order to help us get to better understand the likes of Godzilla, Mutos, where they came from, what they're intending to do, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it doesn't always need to drag on to such a point where it really distracts us from the unique action that we have known over the years, where Godzilla, a kaiju, is out there to cause destruction and possibly even save the world from an even greater threat. Those are two big things that have been trademarked to the character over 6 long decades, and in some regard, there's times where it eventually just comes down to a point where it's not entirely as unique as it used to be for a concept. But for American audiences, it was pretty difficult to be able to find most Godzilla films because many of which were just only made for Japan. Until, of course, the internet came around. And that's how we're able to see such films that never were before seen by American fans of the franchise. So, of course, there is one other big thing out there that I might as well point out. Godzilla's special attack, known as the atomic breath. Yeah, it's a blue-tinted beam of pure radiation that he emits from his mouth, almost like a dragon in a way. But has that ever happened? Well, believe it or not, no. That is up until the very, very, very ending when Godzilla actually defeats the Mutos. Both of them. I mean, he rips one's jaw open like King Kong and, just breathes right into there. That at least is a unique execution right there. Godzilla rips the jaw open, King Kong style, and then just, does that. That I found to be pretty impressive for an execution move. Like, if they made a Mortal Kombat game where Godzilla could be chosen as a character, I would love to see that as a fatality move. I really would. Granted, I'm sure people might have already done that. They made a MonsterVerse version of Mortal Kombat, and the same way we've seen Five Nights at Freddy's Mortal Kombat, or Super Mario Mortal Kombat, or any other crazy thing that could have possibly been a Mortal Kombat thing. The internet just knows how to entertain us left and right. And also irritate us left and right. But anyways, those 3 complaints alone, I feel like I have had against this movie for the past 10 years. And knowing that we actually got a sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong 2020, I mean, it really has gone to show that we have had a lot of improvements. I mean, with 5 movies so far in the MonsterVerse, and hopefully more to come, it does only make sense that they probably had to start somewhere. For Legendary to get the box office they needed to make more films, and of course for audiences to realize they have a new way to catch a break. To be fair, this movie is well made for what it is, and I really do appreciate the fact that we've had to wait a long time to get another American Godzilla film, where the last one flopped pretty badly in many different ways, but is still pretty entertaining for itself. The main problem there, though, was the title. With this, though, it unfortunately does have a few more flaws that no people would have realized. 16 years apart, these films are. With Zilla, the biggest issue was the title, but everything else, including the cast, the storyline, and the kaiju action that's there, are all well done. So, good job, Roland Emmerich and Mr. Tatopoulos. But as for Godzilla 2014, it's pretty well done as well, but just has a few things in there that most people have been rather disappointed of. And so, I guess in that in mind, I would give this a score of 8.1 out of 10.1, and hopefully, I probably will talk more about the Legendary MonsterVerse later, but until then, other things are gonna be keeping me busy for some time. So I'll see you guys later with more films I'm willing to talk about again, and of course, other content that has yet to come around.
Whatever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on.